Let's get rolling. I just want to welcome Sarah and Landon. We'll do introductions in a moment. This week's webcast is sponsored by Olson Thielen. Olson Thielen assists legal firms with tax, audit, and advisory services. They invite you to their video gallery of business and personal finance topics. More at otcpas.com. That's this item right here. We thank Olson Thielen for their support. And welcome, Sarah and Landon. Very excited to talk about the Legal Rights Center this morning. We've already had a great discussion around expungements. I want to thank you both for your active engagement this morning. Why don't we start, Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and who you represent?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. My name's Sarah Davis, and I'm the executive director over at the Legal Rights Center, and just grateful for an opportunity to be here this morning and talk about our work. So the Legal Rights Center is a community-driven nonprofit law firm. We're located right in Minneapolis, right at 16th and Park. If you've ever driven by on 94, you've probably seen our building. It's up on stilts. And we are a law firm that we specialize in criminal defense for kids and for adults, restorative justice work, youth advocacy, and we engage in policy advocacy as it relates to trying to keep folks out of the justice system when at all possible, and improving outcomes for folks who do end up in the system. Legal Rights Center, we're actually in our 50th year. So we were founded in 1970 by the American Indian community and the African American communities in partnership with local law firms, and later joined by the immigrant communities, and we're still led by those communities. And so I'm actually new in my role. So I just started as executive director back in August. I've been at the Legal Rights Center for 8 years. My predecessor had been there for 15 years and made the choice to step away and retire from working with us. And so I'm really honored to be in this role. I'm actually only the 6th person in 50 years to lead the organization, and happen to be the first woman and member of the LGBTQ community in this position. And so, it's a real honor for me, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about our work.
And of course, being only the 6th person in that role, I think says something about the role itself, that it must be viewed as a pretty rewarding role and work that you're doing. I'm wondering if you could talk about kind of that view and kind of that engagement and feedback that you're getting from the community.
Sorry, Landon, you cut out there for me right at the end. If you could talk.
Yeah, kind of the rewarding aspects of being able to do this work in the legal rights center role, as opposed to say working as a private attorney or for the public defender's office.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's the Legal Rights Center is an incredible organization. When we talk about being community driven and community founded, we live that, and we really live our values in that way every single day. Our mission, you can see, is right up on here, and is really, there's very intentional language here about working with communities to seek justice and promote racial equity. Everything that we do is led by and driven by community, and I think that's one of the things that really drew me to the work when I moved here 8 years ago, and really, where I sit right now, feeling really honored to lead this organization, which continues to be a coalition of the founding communities. I think one of the things that I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of folks over the past few months in my new role, and people tend to ask me, well, what's your vision? What are you excited about? And I think the thing that, and the reason I was excited to apply for this position to begin with, is that it's really not about my individual vision. It's about the community vision. And I really see my role as moving forward that community vision. And now, being in our 50th year, our community-led board just went through this really intensive strategic planning process, just completed that this fall, and we're going to be rolling that out. And really excited about the future direction of the organization, and that it's really grounded in community and driven by community. It's also, it can be really freeing to be at a place like the Legal Rights Center. We speak truth regardless of, we don't really spend a lot of time thinking of and worrying about the political impacts of speaking about what's really happening in community. We certainly, we talk about our work and we talk about what's happening, and we do our advocacy in a way that's intended to move the dial and have meaningful impact. And so we think about how we're communicating in that lens, but we don't have to be fearful about, criticizing folks or, we are a community organization, and I think that's really powerful. And, our limit is that we should be speaking truth to what's happening and what our communities are experiencing and have experienced, and what needs to happen to move forward to really achieve justice for community.
I'm very, very curious to know more about your strategic plan, the process for that, sort of what went into it, and what came out of it. But first, I wonder if it might be worthwhile to quickly cover some basic terminology that may be second nature to you and Landon as criminal defense folks. But items like restorative justice, for example, is a concept, an idea that I've seen bandied about, but is not an idea that I have a basic understanding of. Maybe you should walk us through some of the key concepts before we talk about the strategic plan.
Sure. Well, I think what you have up right now on the screen, you can see on that drop down are the two major programs that we operate under at the Legal Rights Center. So the first one is the Community Defense Program. And this is our holistic, client-centered legal representation for children and for adults facing criminal charges in Hennepin County. And we handle all range of cases, and the way that we get our cases, they come in through our community advocates. So we have community advocates from the Native American, African American, and Latinx communities on staff. And our model is unique in that every client that we take on has both an attorney assigned, but also a community advocate assigned, because again, we're really looking to provide that holistic, client-centered, community-oriented, focused defense that's focused on the whole person, and trying to minimize the harm, help the client reach their goals in their own case, and also trying to reduce the likelihood that there will be continued involvement in the justice system. The other program is where our restorative justice work resides, and that's the Youth Education, Advocacy, and Restorative Services program. And I think you're right, it's important to talk about what are we talking about when we talk about restorative services, restorative practices, restorative justice. Really what we're talking about are indigenous practices. The Legal Rights Center didn't sort of come up with a model of restorative justice or a model of restorative practices. Restorative practices is really about returning to a way of doing things with people, doing things with community as opposed to them, which is sort of that punitive model of our traditional justice system where, folks show up, you have an argument, and then the judge sort of says, this is what's going to happen to you, and you're required to follow that. Restorative justice is very different. It's about engaging with folks, and the key word there is with, right? So what is that person, where's that person really strong? Where are they needing to grow? And in the context of harm caused, what is it that the person who was harmed needs, right? Because the justice system, quite honestly, doesn't do a great job of figuring that out or providing that for folks who've been harmed. And so it recognizes the humanity of the person who's caused harm, the person who's been harmed. It recognizes the harm that's been caused to community beyond just an individual. And, I think the easiest way to think about restorative justice as different from traditional criminal justice practices, is that it's based on this theory that people are more likely to make positive changes, to do the things they need to do to be productive moving forward when you do things with them rather than to them or for them. And I think if you think about that, I think that applies to all of us, right? I mean, I'm a lot more likely to do what you want me to do if you give me an opportunity to have a voice in that and to have a say in that and to reflect on that and to be a part of the decision-making process, as opposed to if you tell me, hey, you have to do this and this is how you have to do it. So our YEARS program, for short, Youth Education, Advocacy, and Restorative Services, you can tell that a bunch of lawyers came up with that name. It's very wordy and descriptive, but it's our youth program. So everything we do there is focused on keeping kids out of the justice system. So really trying to break down that school to prison pipeline. And for kids who do end up justice system involved, improving outcomes. And the way we do that work is implementing restorative practices in schools, because we know there's a pipeline from schools into the justice system. And then really, actually, we've been over the past couple of years working on this project where we're trying to implement restorative justice practices at every decision point leading to and within the justice system. So that's at schools. We work with the Minneapolis Police Department to engage in restorative justice diversion for kids before it ever makes it to the county attorney, working with the county attorney's office on diversion, and actually most recently starting a pilot with Hennepin County Juvenile Court to implement restorative practices at disposition for kids and give folks an opportunity to engage differently in a community-based circle process. So that may be a longer answer, but that sort of gives you the overview of what we do.
We've talked regularly, I think, on even here about this idea, especially in the access to justice conversations, about how the ideal model is not to parachute into a community and deliver services, and then sort of the military model of delivering legal services. It's super interesting that I think that you're talking about doing it with the community. I wonder, and I think that's part of a legacy of access to justice that maybe was a little bit lost since the late 60s, following on Gene and Edgar Kahn's work. I wonder if, I guess what I'm wondering is, in addition to those connections you make with the police and schools, I'm not quite sure how to ask the question, even sociologically, psychologically, how are you making those connections with communities in a way that isn't about me being the attorney delivering services, but is about bringing community leaders into the process?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think that's something that's really foundational to all of our work, whether we're in community, engaging in restorative services, engaging in policy advocacy, or quite frankly, even when we're representing clients. I think that's part of the value of what I was talking about before. We're an organization that's been around for 50 years, that was founded by community and is still led by community, and we live the values of our community, right? So our board, by our bylaws, has to be made up of more than half of our board members have to be leaders from our founding communities. And that is our practice. In fact, well more than that, a much higher percentage than that. We have community advocates on our staff that we really rely on to be community voice in our space. And we're really intentional about building partnerships with community. We have an expectation that our staff is working with community, and we are, I think I can give you an example of what this looks like in practice. So for example, the justice system as it's set up doesn't really, is really disconnected from community. And it's really in that very sort of, even in the juvenile justice world, where folks like to have this ideal that we're, really more, we're less punitive. It just really is that model of we're doing this to you, right? Because it's just how it's designed. But we worked with them and we brought in folks from community circle keepers, restorative practitioners from community, and said, we would like to institute this partnership with the court where we're asking judges to give up some of their power and authority, and they've agreed to do it, right? Where they say at sentencing, at disposition for a kid, they say, you qualify for this opportunity to say, you're going to go to a community restorative circle with your family, with community circle keepers, with the person who was harmed if they choose to participate, with a probation officer, with other community members. And in that circle space, you're going to come up with what should your sentence be? What is your community? We call it a community accountability plan. What is your restorative plan for community? And then you're going to follow through on that plan. And then if you do that, then your case will be resolved, right? And it's not a judge saying, okay, you're going to do 20 hours of community service, you're going to do anger management, you're going to do this program, you're going to do that program. The judge is saying, you're going to go make that decision, you're going to have a voice in that with community, and then you're going to be accountable to that, and then we'll sign off on it if you've done it. And that's a huge shift, right? But that's part of what we've tried to do, is to say, how can we engage community to sort of bridge this divide between community and justice system, to have things look different and to really return some power to community to be able to resolve their own problems and to really support their own community members.
That's remarkable. I mean, do you, and I wonder what it looks like. So do these plans, how do these plans, I guess, not look like what the person might think the judge would offer? Do you know what I'm saying? So how is it truly not trying to emulate the status quo?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, and we've talked about this a lot with our justice system partners when we've been doing this work, is that it's a round peg in a square hole, right? Like, I mean, you're really trying to take a restorative circle community-based process and fit it into this system that is not designed to do that. But the way what it really looks like in practice is, what I said, which is that judge, we've spent a lot of time working on who can be eligible for this, how does that work, how do we get this set up? And then you have a probation officer who's a part of that process, right? And they're deeply familiar with what are the resources that the court might offer. What are the programs that Hennepin County has access to, right? And so they're a part of that process. But instead of it being that the judge or probation is saying, here are the 5, I've evaluated you, and these are the 5 things that I've decided that you need to do in order to return to being a productive person, or to resolve your case. They're one voice as part of that community circle process. And so they're a voice that goes along with the person who was harmed, the victim, in the traditional justice language sense. You hear me use different language because that's the language we use in the restorative context: person who caused harm and the person who was harmed. The family is there. They know their children, right? They know what they need to be successful. The child is there. They're able, because it's about doing it with, right? They're able to say, like, that's something that I feel like I could get on board with, right? This is, I can agree that I need to work on my impulse control or my anger. And that sounds like a program that I might be willing to try out and to participate in. And it's really just about shifting the process by which we get to the outcome. But you still, because we are in this justice system sense, there's still that oversight. So probation reports up to the judge, right? And the judge reviews the community agreement at the end. And if probation has concerns that it's not working, they might get back together as a circle, or if it's really falling apart, they might come back to court, right? But we've been doing this in 2020, this is something we started. We've had incredible feedback from probation officers, who have said this, we're getting to know our, these young people, their families, we're having outcomes that just look different, and the family engagement looks different, which, to the credit of Hennepin County probation, they're the ones who really worked with us to make this happen, because they want to do things differently with young people and with their families. And I think that's the model going forward, right? Like, how do we bring community to the table to partner and to have things look different? It requires justice system folks to give up some of their power, but when they do, it really has a powerful impact.
So I was wondering if we could take a step back even further in that process, because you talk a lot about once they get to court and the outcomes of court, which I think is absolutely fantastic and amazing. But you also mentioned that you guys are getting involved before that and trying to get involved more at the school level and the education level as much as you guys can. That's something that I know the MSBA had done, had a program that they had been doing. I think HCBA might have had a similar program where there was outreach that's attempted with the schools. And it's hit or miss. There's some programs that work really good, and the education part is a little bit. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's just informative about the legal practice. That's something I've always kind of wanted to see grow with bar associations or with whatever organization I'm with. I'm curious how you guys do that, how you guys reach out and make those connections and are a part of the schools and their education process.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, before I started at the Legal Rights Center, folks had this vision that, you know, we really wanted to keep kids out of the justice system who didn't need to be there. And they were having a lot of difficulty making inroads with folks who had the ability to make those decisions within the justice system. So they said, let's go to the schools directly and develop these partnerships. So we have this decade-long partnership, for example, with Minneapolis Public Schools. We've been working with St. Paul Public Schools for the past six plus years. And what was started before my time there and has really just grown and has been incredible, with really powerful outcomes, is to say, you know, young people who are engaging in serious behaviors in a school-based context, if we can engage with the schools, with youth, with their families, with the schools in a restorative way, and develop what we call a restorative support and accountability plan, similar to what I talked to right at the back end at the court system. But if we can do it on the front end with the schools, we can reach a situation where you don't have to send that child to the justice system, because we can have that impact just by doing it with the school. And then you can avoid all of the harms that are well documented from sending kids into the justice system. So we engage in there's a lot of different restorative practices. We at the Legal Rights Center facilitate a practice called family group conferencing that brings together the youth, the family. In the school context, it's the school, it might be district, you know, whoever's in that child's community of support, to address the issue. And you know, the University of Minnesota did a study on our work. They studied our partnership with Minneapolis Public Schools when it was focused on, it should be on our website, the study. It's about the, when students were referred for expulsion, right? So those high level behaviors, having a weapon or assaultive behavior or things to that nature. Yeah, if you want to click on the key data, it should be in there. And what they ended up finding, as you can see here, is that youth were really successful. So, you know, this first page just talks about who were the young people and what were the sort of qualitative outcomes. Like this is a space where young people and their families were referred because the child had been referred for expulsion. And we had 97% of parents and 91% of students saying they would recommend this program to a friend. I can promise you that that's not the numbers you're going to get if you ask, like, if you're referred to the justice system, right? So, but if you go to the second page, there's some quantitative data there that shows that, you know, you had really impressive, scroll down just a little bit farther, really impressive outcomes as it were. One more scroll, maybe towards the bottom of the page, is that kids were in school more, being suspended less, the school records data down at the bottom there. So the year, they looked at data for kids the year prior to the expulsion incident, the year of, and the year after the expulsion incident. And what they found is kids were more likely to be attending school the year after the expulsion if they've participated in this process, that they were having fewer suspensions, fewer days suspended. And I can't remember it right. If you scroll down a little farther, Mike, all the way to the bottom of the page there, maybe it's just not showing up on mine, but you know, there's really impressive data around kids being in school more and engaging in fewer. Yeah, there you go. So the year of their expulsion incident, they had one suspension for every 24 days in school, and the year after participating in this program, one suspension for every 101 days in school. That's pretty remarkable data, and I can promise you there's no justice system data that can mirror that. And again, these are really high level behaviors. And so part of what we've done over the past years is to try and we use this to advocate with our justice system partners to say, there is another way, right? Like we don't have to cause the harm that's happening. And that's the beauty of the Legal Rights Center, is the ability as a community nonprofit law firm to really advance those conversations and to advance community visions for justice.
And so I'm curious with that. I mean, it sounds like it's very much, program where you're working with the administration, and then you get called in for, um, I don't want to say specialty cases, but you're called in on an individual basis. Uh, does the Legal Rights Center provide kind of a general overarching education to kids, or anything to that extent?
You mean about legal education or?
Yeah, are there programs like that?
Sure. Yep. So, and that's a little bit separate. So this is our, this is what we were talking about was our referrals for specific restorative services. But part of our community mission and part of the community ask is about community education, and that really, for the most part, right now has been residing in our youth program. But part of our strategic plan moving forward is to really expand that out. So we're really fortunate. We have an attorney on our staff who's a former educator and has really gone through and developed curriculum, really engaging curriculum for folks related to know your rights. And so we implement that in schools, we implement that with community programs. We in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd here in Minneapolis, we started doing a train the trainer model where we were doing know your rights at a protest, so that we had folks out on the ground being able to provide folks 5 to 10 minutes overview of what are my rights. I'm here at this protest. So we do a lot of that, and it's something that we have a vision to expand moving forward, because there's a huge, we heard that loud and clear in our community process for engaging on the strategic planning, that we need to be doing more of that. And so I hope that 5 years from now you'll hear us and you'll see, even it won't be hard to find on our website, right? It'll be obvious where that is. And
I was just looking at it right before we logged in, and I saw that. I'd love to talk about 5 years from now. You said that you did a big strategic planning session. I wonder what that, I can't even imagine what that might look like for an organization like yours. And sort of what new thinking is going into the organization, and what kind of changes you think you need to make. And what's new? I mean, why the need for, as Landon mentioned, you've been successful for 50 years. Why is such a process even necessary?
Well, I mean, I think that last one is really easy to answer, which is that for any healthy, organization, particularly a nonprofit, it's really important to be connecting and thinking about, are you meeting your mission, and do you need to be are you doing things the way they should be done? Or are there opportunities for change and for growth? And I think it's just a really healthy part of a process for an organization like ours. This was a process that was really led by our board, and again, our board is very much a community driven board, and really designed to be a community process. So this was before I was in my role as the executive director, and but the board made the choice to do this and partnered with consultant organization Durenberger Schwartz, I believe is what their names are, and to really engage in this very intentional process of connecting with our partners, right? And that is community. So they did a lot of board sessions, but they also went out and interviewed folks that we partner with. They interviewed community members. They really had this process where they were doing a deep dive on what, both what we're doing, what we should be doing, what is the community perspective on where we need to be going. And they also connected with all of our staff, right? Who, we have really talented, incredible staff that are the heart of our work, and with our community advocates, and came up with this strategic plan that we're going to be rolling out to the community. I mean, I can highlight a little bit of it here, but really we're going to be rolling this out with the community in 2021, and really looking to move this forward. A lot of it is about continuing our legacy of, and the work that we've been doing and doing really well with community for a long time, and also growing, right? So I mentioned earlier, there's a huge need for community education around your legal rights. And so really thinking intentionally, it's not something that has ever been, until very recently, we've not had specific funding to support that. And it's always, even recently, it's a very small percentage of our budget. So really thinking intentionally, like, how are we connecting with funding partners, with individuals who might be interested in that, to say, this is something that the community is asking for, and this is our strategy around how we're going to get that out there. And being able to seek the funding we need to be able to grow in that area, going deeper with our community. And so what does it look like? We're in our 50th year. What does the next 50 years look like of engaging with communities? And quite honestly, our community looks different than it did 50 years ago, right? And certainly over those years we've evolved, but where are there areas where we need to develop new connections? Where do we need to go deeper in order to make sure that we are really meeting our mission of seeking justice with community, and really seeking the communities and promoting the community's vision for justice going forward?
We have been cautious when, especially when we're talking about rural communities, not to assume that one rural community, just because one rural community. This is Michelle Stotz's admonition to us when we talk about access to justice in rural communities. Just because you're from Ely doesn't mean Virginia. I wonder if that's the same. When we talk about community, or communities in the metro area here, as a resident of Kingfield neighborhood, I would say, that's a very, very different community than, even the neighboring Lindale or Tangletown or, whatever it might be. How do you, is that kind of set up something that's part of your awareness, or is it a little bit more general based on the kind of work you do?
I think that's a huge part of what the board was looking at in this. We have a strategic, and one of our 7 strategic initiatives is really looking at how we're engaging with community. And one of the points in there is really thinking is like, broadening our reach and making sure that we're connecting with, and the only way you can do that is to acknowledge that, communities are not monolithic, right? So like you heard me say earlier, we're founded by the African American, American Indian, and immigrant communities. Well, that's not 3 communities, right? I mean, I think also, Hennepin County and Minnesota generally has, more recently, certainly more recently than 50 years ago, has a very strong African immigrant community. So even within the communities that have founded us and still lead our organization, there's more diversity, right? And so I think a big part of what I hope we're going to be doing in the coming months and years is, we've already started the process of mapping our partnerships and mapping who we're connected to, so that we can start to see where are there gaps, right? And where do we need to grow and to be stronger? And I see that as part of my job of really supporting folks to be thinking about where are we connected and where do we need to grow connections.
That's very cool. I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty, but when you talk about mapping, on a very practical level, I'm wondering, is that like a visualization? Is that a spreadsheet? Is that what's that process look like?
Yeah, and also, what does that process look like in COVID, right? I mean,
Yeah.
If we were in person in our office, it would look a lot different than it does on Zoom, the way we're doing it right now. It's a combination. It's, I have spreadsheets and that works well for my brain, but there's a lot of visualization. There's a lot of dialogue, right, with our staff and with our community members around where are we connected, and documenting that. We have built a visual map. It's very overwhelming to look at, but it's, it's also very impressive. And I think, it's both about our communities, but also our partners, and making sure that we have access to the community resources that the clients that we're working with need in order for us to really fulfill our mission of being, a holistic, client-centered, community-driven place for folks to come and seek access to justice.
I'm going to remind folks too that you can ask questions into chat. Chat's been unusually quiet this morning. It must be the early hour.
There's not enough coffee out there this morning.
It is.
That's my take. I don't know about you, Sarah. I'm generally not a morning person, but Mike has convinced me to wake up early on these Thursday mornings. So.
I'm so a morning person. The complicating factor for me is we have a 3.5-year-old and an 8-month-old, so mornings can be a little chaotic in our house.
Yeah, are they? So are they joining you in the work process nowadays?
They were over the summer when the baby was very little, but we have received permission from the pediatrician to return to daycare, and our daycare has a good COVID safety plan, so they are going to daycare.
So, so speaking of that, and knowing, of course, what's going on with the courts for December and January, how has the Legal Rights Center been able to kind of keep up and running and operating to the extent that it can during the pandemic?
Well, I mean, we, it's a necessity. Like people, there's our clients and our communities still absolutely need access to us. And, if I'm being honest, in many ways, the need has been greater, particularly in the aftermath of Mr. Floyd's murder and, the community protests and the need for access to community legal resources. So we have been really intentional about how we're trying to keep folks safe. And we think both about our staff, but also our community members and our clients and families. And so mostly we're remote. I mean, you can see I'm sitting in in the basement right now because it was early and the kids were not gone to daycare yet. But mostly we're remote and using mostly remote technology to connect with each other. But the courts have been open actually, and so that has been challenging because, I think if we're being honest about that, it hasn't felt like the safest experience for clients and for our attorneys. People were not being screened coming into the courthouses. There was a news article, I think it was the Star Tribune recently, had experts come in and evaluate like the risks in the courthouse. And on a scale of like 0 to 4, 0 being low and 4 being high, they said it was a 3 or 4, right? And so that's really concerning, both for me in my role where I have a responsibility to keep our staff and our clients and our communities safe, but also just generally for community. When you have folks who have to show up to court, right? And you're being forced to come into these situations that are really unsafe. So certainly a welcome change that the courts are taking a step back and saying, we're going to slow down on the out of custody in-person hearings. But it's not, Hennepin County is not fully shut down by any means. We have folks, trials are going forward over the coming weeks. And, we're doing our best. We procured, masks, and we've set up, when folks come into the office, we have very clear rules about, we have screening. We screen coming into our office for staff and for anybody who comes into the office, we do screening. But when you get into a situation where folks are going to court, and it's a little bit outside our control, you have packed hallways and, lines for folks going through, we have security for physical security, but not, no screening for health in the midst of a global pandemic is really hard and very concerning.
So, and just to switch topics for a second here, because Graciela, who I think you know,
I know Graciela. Hi,
sending in
Graciela.
a question, and she was wondering about Legal Rights Center expanding to additional counties, talking about the high need in Anoka and Scott and surrounding counties. Any thoughts from the Legal Rights Center over the next 5-year, 10-year plans?
A lot of our strategic plan is focused on, at least on I think Graciela is probably referring to our criminal defense services, and really focused on how we're doing that work really well in our community. And Graciela for sure knows this, and is that one of the challenges about just saying, okay, well, we can take cases up in Anoka County, or we can take cases in Dakota County, or where have you, is that we don't want to just take cases to take cases. Our model is to do work in a community-driven, holistic way. And so that would mean that we would have to really be deeply connected in those communities and have deep connections to the resources and to the communities there. And I think that's something, the board might think about in the future, but I think right now we're really trying to make sure that we are deeply connected to the diverse communities in Hennepin County, for making sure that we're providing the best possible criminal defense to our clients here. Undoubtedly there's strong need elsewhere, and part of that is there is a general vision for increasing our advocacy work, right? And part of that advocacy is advocating for folks to have the type of access to the type of services that we provide here across the state.
What about, this is kind of going back to the access aspect, with a lot of the courts technically not being shut down, but trying to close the in-person as much as possible. I've heard different policies from different organizations across Minnesota, and sometimes even within the public defender's system, some counties are allowing in-person hearings. Some counties, the public defender system is saying, no, we're not doing anything in person. We're doing everything remotely. Well, to the extent they're able. And the alternative, we're not doing anything remotely. With you and the clientele that you guys are working with, have you guys been able to find a way to help clients embrace virtual hearings? Is that something that's available for a percentage of your clients? Or
Absolutely, we have worked to support where it's where it's not going to impact our clients' rights, right, to do things remotely. And in some circumstances, some types of hearings, you undoubtedly know, Landon, that's very doable, right? Even pre-pandemic, you've had folks coming down to court to be like, why do I even have to show up for this, right? And so that type of hearing, to do that remotely, in contexts where our clients have access to the technology and folks can really access it, that's something we're supporting. But there's, when you get to the more substantive hearings, we have a lot of concerns about doing that remotely. Motions, or, contested bail hearings, contested, really anything where you're trying to make a contested substantive argument can be very challenging to do remotely. And we talked earlier about the disconnect between courts and community. And I think when you then put people on a screen, right, like the person becomes even less of a human being, right? Like our court systems are really set up to process, right, large numbers as efficiently as possible. And that's really not compatible with a community vision for justice, right? Like you need to see the human being and understand who they are and their circumstances. And when you put them behind a screen, it just adds one more layer. So, if you're just doing a procedural thing and you're, just getting another date, that's one thing. But I think we've had a lot of concerns about what that looks like when you're trying to do things more substantively. I'll give you an example, like even on, so before I was in this role, most of my legal work was representing kids in court. And I ask you to imagine a circumstance where you have a child facing a criminal charge and their access to technology is with their parents, but they and their parents don't agree on what should be happening on their case or, on a substantive issue. And your only connection as a lawyer to them is through the technology, at a hearing, versus if you're in person and you can like have an actual private conversation, confidential conversation with your client. So there's for sure challenges. And, I think our perspective all along has been, we need to prioritize the safety of clients in the same way that we're prioritizing the safety of, court professionals, right? Like we need to screen folks coming in. We need to make sure that there's systems in place to make sure people are safe. And if we're doing technology, let's not do it in a way that is going to violate due process rights and cause even further disconnect between the justice system and communities.
That's such a interesting point. I had a long conversation with a Vermont attorney the other night who serves in I forgot what she called it. It's in the northeast portion of the state, very, very rural. She said that Zoom has basically, the pandemic has saved her business because she can do client meetings and hearings through Zoom now. But her point was, it's great. She's not driving around the state. Her clients don't have to, get daycare and, take time off of work. So huge benefits there, but really for her, more resources in the communities, technology is not necessarily the answer, even though, she said it was, better for her business and oftentimes better for her clients, but still, the capacity for to have community-based resources is just as important. Northeast Kingdom. Yes. Thank you, Daniel.
And of course, a request for the CLE code, which
Oh, yep. Sorry.
we always miss that 830 bit.
I have been to Vermont several times. Vermont's an interesting place. I've always felt like an outsider there, and folks tell me who've lived there for 50 years. They said, "Yeah, I'm totally, I don't belong here. I've lived here my whole life. My grandparents lived here their whole lives." And yeah,
I grew up in upstate New York, like way upstate New York, the very northeast corner. So right across a lake from Vermont. And so I'm very familiar with that part of the world and with Vermont. It's beautiful and it's a great place.
it is very beautiful. It is very beautiful. I'm going to give folks in chat one last chance to correct my Vermont geography or to ask a question. This is a great conversation. So thanks, Sarah, for joining us so early in the morning. Landon will tell you that, it's hard to do with kids. I know. So I really, really appreciate you joining us. It was a great conversation. The CLE code, if anybody's calling in, is 336074. That's 336074. Sarah, how do folks, just as maybe a quick final question, how do folks either get a hold of you or if you're looking for support for your organization, how might our listeners support you?
Well, I'll drop our website into the chat box here, and that's where you can go to, learn about our work and, if you want to support our work. And then I will also drop my email address in here. So if you want to be in touch with me directly, email tends to be the best opportunity just because I'm working remotely and my phone is in my office. It does sometimes ring through to my cell phone, but it depends if that technology is working on that day. And so, but I really welcome hearing from folks, and, I just thank you for the opportunity to be here, and, hope I can come back maybe in a sometime in the future and talk about where we're at with our rollout of our strategic plan and where we're going.
Yes, definitely keep us up to speed. Very interested to follow you. And do you do Twitter or are you on the social media by any chance? Is that
we are on social media. We don't post as frequently as we maybe would like to in an ideal world. I can try and I don't even know. It's called a Twitter handle. I can try and drop that in there, but you can search for us on Twitter and on Facebook. We are, and we're actually also on Instagram. But as Mike and I were talking about, sort of before our formal session began, part of our strategic plan is doing a better job of communicating who we are and what we're doing. And so I hope you'll see more of a presence from us on that in the future.
I have to ask, simply because you said it, that you guys are on Instagram. I'm very curious as to how you found a way for a legal services organization to positively use Instagram. For years I've been like, there's not a way to do that positively.
It's a good question. I I don't manage the Instagram posts, but I will say that I think what we've done, which I think has been really valuable, is use it as a place to try and get out information about things we're doing in the community, right? So, for example, I mentioned earlier that we had, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, we were doing on the ground know your rights trainings for folks, and know your rights at a protest. And then somebody reached out to us who had seen us on, and so we were advertising that we were doing these and that you could join. Someone reached out to us and offered and said, hey, I am not a lawyer, I can't help with that, but I have this skill set where I could create a video for you. Do you want to create a know your rights video? Of course, like we don't have any ability to do that. And so then they created that, we worked with them to create that, and with some young people. And so then we're able to put that out on a platform also like Instagram. It's like a 2-minute video of, basic know your rights when interacting with the police. And, so we put that type of thing out on Instagram. So.
That's a great great way to get the information out, I think, for folks. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Thanks to our guest, Sarah Davis. We will stay in touch, Sarah. We'll be checking in on you from time to time, and feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have you back. Keep us up to speed as to what's happening in your world. We'd love to promote it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. And I did find our Twitter handle, so I dropped that into the chat if anybody wants to check us out there. But thanks again for the conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I would note, Mike, I think next week we are back with, who is it that we have next week?
Yes, I always forget that Conrad Sam of Mockingbird is gonna, we were just talking with Sarah beforehand about how folks were taking some of their downtime to, and how I can never find a web developer to recommend. But Conrad Sam is a great marketer and is very, very versed in SEO and web development. And so I'm going to be asking him about how to find a web developer or how to do it yourself. So looking forward to him. Conrad Sam from Mockingbird Media. And
I believe Jessica Birkin will be co-hosting next week.
That's right. We have a new co-host, Jess Birkin, who I'm sure many of you know. She'll be our new co-host. We'll have a lot of new co-hosts in 2021.
That's the goal.
Yeah. It's not just going to be Landon and I going on and on. It'll be other folks joining us. So excited to add a new group to this session. So with that, have a great day, everyone. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.